Okay, so today we are going to talk about irony and the different types of irony that we usually talk about when we are talking about literature. But before we get to that, let's do a quick warm up. And I would love for you to just take a couple minutes to jot down what you think of when you think of the word irony or ironic, and just spend a couple minutes, jot down some examples of when people say that's ironic, or what you think that irony means, or when you've heard it, you can attempt to define it, write words or phrases that you associate with it, and just free write brainstorm. Take about 3 to 5 minutes to do that. So if I'm teaching this with a group of students, then I would allow them to actually chat about it either with a partner or with a full class, and we'll kind of hear what people are bringing into the conversation already from when they've heard this term before, because there is actually quite a bit of confusion with the term irony because there's different types of irony and because people misuse the term. Honestly, so there's some confusion that students might bring into the classroom with irony. So we would chat about that a little bit. And then we're going to just talk about why authors use irony. These are some of the reasons why authors use irony, and we'll kind of circle back to this later on, maybe at the end of the class period or later on in the school year, as we start to see how irony does allow authors to do these different things, to add surprise, to create a little more intrigue in a story. But we'll just run through these lists. There's lots of reasons why authors use irony. You know, that it does create suspense, it creates some tension, it just adds another element to a story, and it can make a story more compelling, more interesting. It can motivate the reader to keep reading, and that will become more clear as we get into some examples of irony. So let's just talk briefly about terms. These are the three types of irony that we're usually talking about when we are talking about irony in English class. So there's verbal irony, there's dramatic irony, and there's situational irony. Put simply, verbal irony is somebody says something that's the opposite of what they mean. Dramatic irony is when the reader or audience knows something that the characters don't know. And then situational irony is when the outcome is different than what's expected. So let's break it down a little bit more. Verbal irony, there can be a couple different types of verbal irony. And so these are the three different types. If you're teaching this with your students, you might go through each one, or you might decide to just focus on one. When I'm teaching ninth grade students, I really just talk about sarcasm and how verbal irony can be similar to sarcasm, although I do distinguish that sarcasm kind of has a bite to it. Sometimes, most of the time, verbal irony doesn't always necessarily have that bite. It can just be that the person says the opposite of what they mean. And then hyperbole, overstatement, and then understatement. These are other types of verbal irony. So this example sort of reminds me of Romeo and Juliet, where Mercutio says like, "Oh, it's just a scratch, it's just a scratch," but he's actually been stabbed and is dying. So that's understatement. That's a type of verbal irony. So you see how that's a little different than sarcasm. And then overstatement is when we use hyperbole. So it's not exactly the opposite, but it's an overstatement of what somebody actually feels. So our example here, Brian sends a DM to D saying he'll just die if he doesn't get concert tickets. So it's extreme. It's not literal. Verbal irony is not literal. Now, dramatic irony is when the reader or the audience knows something more than the characters in the story. And I personally feel this is one of the best tools an author can use to get somebody to keep reading a story, because we know something the characters don't know. Well, how does that make us feel? We want to know, when are they going to find out? How are they going to feel when they do find out? What's going to happen? So that's how dramatic irony can really add some tension and some intrigue to a story. So here you have a picture that kind of shows you that. You know, here we have this guy and he's got a rose and a box, and this girl who's just reading, she doesn't know what's going to happen. We know something that she doesn't know because of the viewpoint of this picture. And so it's the same thing with literature. The author has given us a viewpoint. He's given us a peek into something that's going on that the characters don't yet know. Situational irony is what we are usually talking about when we just say irony and we don't have that adjective in front of it. This is when the outcome is different than what is expected. Now, this can mean just sort of like a twist or surprise, and sometimes that's what it is, but a lot of times irony has a little bit more complexity to that. Like maybe there is something a bit bizarre or a bit comical, even about what has actually happened. So, look at this example. Here we have a librarian, and she yells, "You are so loud. Be quiet over there. This is a library." Well, the irony here is that it's a library, but she is yelling for people to be quiet. So, see, it's unexpected. It's a bit of a surprise, but do you see how it sort of has like another layer to it of the unexpected? So it's not just like a twist ending. It's a little bit different. There's another level of complexity there. Okay, and then I love to just use examples from movies and childhood movies because a lot of students remember childhood movies. I have kids of my own, and they have a tendency to watch the same movie over and over. And so a lot of students remember these movies very clearly. So it can be nice to draw examples from movies because they know them so well, and then they can understand the concept, the literary concept, more clearly because they're already familiar with the text that we're talking about, in this case, movies. Okay, so in Monsters Inc., the monsters are actually afraid of the children they are trying to scare. So what type of irony is that? Is it verbal, dramatic, situational? Think about that real quick, and then we're going to talk about it. It's situational because it's unexpected. It's a bit surprising that monsters would be afraid when they are the ones doing the scaring. So it's got a little bit of a twist and unexpected element there. In the movie Frozen, we as the viewer know Elsa has powers, but Anna does not know this. We are privy to some information that Anna does not yet know, and so we know why Elsa is all mean and distant, but Anna doesn't know that. So what type of irony is that? That is, of course, dramatic irony. And then our next example in the movie Up, the main character says, "I'm a senior citizen. I don't do dangerous things." But he has just tied thousands of balloons to his house to embark on an adventure / escape the authorities. So he is saying something, but it's not true. And it's actually the opposite is happening. He's doing the opposite of what he says. And so what type of irony is that? So at this point, you will give your students access to the Irony Choice Board, and they will get to either read short stories, watch short clips, watch short animated films, listen to songs, or read poetry, or a combination of all of those things. And they will start to decipher where the irony is in these texts. Now, if you want to scaffold this lesson a bit more, what you can do is a we do, pairs do, you do type of strategy. And in that case, what we would do is one text we would do together, and then pairs would do a text, and then students on their own would do a text. Let me switch over to the choice board and explain that a little bit more. So here is the Irony choice board, and you can feel free as the teacher to change some of these stories out, change the clips out however you would like to do it. But what this allows your students to do is to interact with several different examples of irony in texts. So we have these short animated films over here. We have a scene from a movie. And then this is a whole Twilight Zone episode, a bit longer here, but the other ones are pretty short. We have poems and songs here that they can listen to or read the poems, and then short stories, which obviously the short stories are going to take longer than interacting with these texts, although all the short stories, or most of the short stories we've chosen here, are pretty short, 3 to 4 pages. So with the strategy of we do, pairs do, you do, what you can do is perhaps watch one of the short clips. The present is a good one to do. This is a really nice one. So as a class, you can watch this and then talk about the irony that comes up. Where do we see irony? What type of irony is it? And then what effect does that have on the story being told? How does that make the reader interested? How does the reader feel at the end, because where the irony is kind of revealed? And so talk through that one as a full class so that students see the process of trying to distinguish where the irony is. Then you can have students do one text together where it's a pairs do activity. So they might choose a poem or a song. Maybe you're going to let them do another short film or film clip, or the Twilight Zone episode. I would have them do one of these kind of medium length things. And then they would do the same thing in partners where they read or listen to or watch the text. They talk about what they think the irony is that comes up. What type of irony do they think that is? Go back and check your definitions and examples. And then what effect does it have on the viewer, reader, listener, or whatever the case may be? How does that intrigue you? How does it make it more interesting that the author has used or the creator has used irony? Then allow them to do it individually. So this is the you do part of the scaffolding strategy. And for this one, it might be an appropriate time to allow them to do one of the short stories on their own, but allow them to pick which short story. This is where you can bring differentiation in without you having to do extra work, but allow them to pick whichever story they would like to do. And then they're going to read it, of course, and think about the irony, what type of irony it is, and then what effect does that have on the reader's experience, even the message of the story. This is what the note sheet looks like for the guided notes. This is for the slideshow at the beginning where they're writing down terms. Now, depending on your group of learners, you might decide to write some of the notes in here already, that they have those already on there. Maybe they just fill in a word or two here, or maybe you want them to write that all out by hand. It's really going to depend on your group of students and your note-taking philosophy, how much you want them to do in terms of writing and note-taking, and how much of the class period you want to devote to that, or do you just want them to jot down a few things pretty quickly and move on to the choice board? And then this is the part of the handout for the choice board where they're going to write down what text they're interacting with, the examples of irony they saw, what type of irony is it, and then how does it affect the reader. So you could copy and paste and do a couple more pages of this if you want them to do several different things from the irony choice board. We only include 2 sheets here, but like I said, you can of course extend that if you would like. And then it's a good idea to end the class period with an exit ticket of some sort. This one, for example, just says write the definition of situational irony in your own words and give one example from today's class period. This is really the crux of the lesson, that they have an understanding of what irony is. And I just chose situational irony for this one because that's the one that we really talk about a lot in literature. But of course, we talk about the other ones as well. So you might have them write a definition of all 3 or one, or maybe they choose which one they would like to write a definition of. But really at the end of the class, you want to close it up with making sure they do have some understanding of your main concept here that you focused on. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope that you see how this way of allowing your students to interact with a choice board with a lot of examples gives them student agency, buy-in, and some individual practice. If you would like this whole lesson, I'm going to put a link in the comments, and you can access the blog post where I put this entire lesson. You can make a copy of it and you can edit it and make it your own. I would love to hear from you if you enjoyed this. We also have over 400 resources inside the English Teacher Vault. And if you enjoyed this lesson, we've got many, many, many more lessons inside the English Teacher Vault. We would love to have you as part of our community there. So find us at EnglishTeacherVault.com for many more great resources for your secondary English classroom. Thanks so much.